time, there were around 5 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S.
Invaded by immigrants who are like cancer cells.
There were a few legal channels, but not many. If they married an American citizen, they could get lawful status. Or if maybe their brother was a citizen already, he could sponsor them. Or an employer could. And these could be done after they were already living in the U.S. undocumented. Also made another huge fundamental change in the U.S. immigration system. Mexican immigrants who came to the U.S. unlawfully were about 50% likely to return to Mexico within a year. But after 1996, more people started staying in the U.S. It shaped the way the U.S. focuses on immigration enforcement as a deterrent.
Today, it's all about unauthorized immigration to the U.S. And we've got fresh research from the Pew Research Center to guide us. Think of it as our roadmap, giving us the numbers, the trends, and the real stories behind all those headlines.
Exactly. We got to cut through the noise and figure out who these individuals really are, where they're coming from, what their lives are like, and maybe the most interesting part, how things have changed recently.
Because, like they say, demographics are destiny, right?
That's right.
So first things first, this research points to something pretty interesting. Unauthorized immigration to the U.S. is actually increasing again after, years of decline.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, right?
Yeah. In 2022, the number hit 11 million. So what's the deal? What's going on here?
Well, for years, from 2007 to 2019, that number was steadily dropping. Everyone thought that was it. And then, bam, uptick.
Like hitting rewind on a trend everyone thought was a done deal?
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is this is the first real increase since those back-to-back jumps we saw in the mid-2000s, 2005 to 2007. We're not quite back to that 2007 peak of 12.2 million, but still. This reversal really makes you think, right? What's changed? Were past immigration policies not as effective as we thought? What new factors are in play now?
So what's behind this shift? What's fueling it?
Well, the research points to a few key things. First, those record-high border encounters we saw throughout 2022 and even into 2023. Those numbers are hard to ignore.
Definitely.
And then there's the surge in asylum seekers, individuals, and families fleeing really tough situations.
Right.
And of course, you can't talk about unauthorized immigration without considering government programs. Programs like CHV, that's the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelan parole program, and U4U, the Uniting for Ukraine program, they've definitely added another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
And I imagine that makes it even harder to track who's coming and going, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. These programs, while I'm sure they're well-intentioned, they've made it much harder to get an accurate count. We're talking about a lot of new arrivals, and figuring out their status within the whole immigration system, that's a challenge.
Wow. Okay. So we've got a lot of moving parts here. And speaking of shifting demographics, the research also revealed a pretty surprising trend with Mexican nationals. Historically a major source of unauthorized immigration to the U.S.
It is surprising, isn't it? For the first time in a long time, the number of unauthorized immigrants from Mexico is actually going down. Back in 2007, there were 6.9 million. But by 2022, down to 4 million.
That's a massive drop. What's causing that? Stricter border control? The economy?
It's not just one thing, more like a perfect storm,
When?
Declining migration rates from Mexico, more Mexicans deciding to go back home, and really important, expanded opportunities for legal immigration. It all adds up. But this brings up a big question. If Mexican immigration is down, who's filling that gap? Where are people coming from now?
All right, you gotta spill the tea, give us the details.
It seems the U.S. is becoming a destination for people from everywhere, not just Mexico anymore. We're seeing more unauthorized immigration from almost every other region: the Caribbean, South America, Asia, even Europe and sub-Saharan Africa. The only exception, and it's a big one, is Central America. Their numbers seem to have plateaued after 2019, which, after years of being the fastest growing group, is something to watch.
So it's a real global shift in who's migrating to the U.S. and why.
Exactly. It's not just a Mexico-U.S. story anymore. This is about what's happening globally, economic differences, political climates, and how all of that is changing the face of unauthorized immigration in America.
And these trends aren't just numbers on a page. They have real-world impacts, especially in certain states.
Yeah, these trends really hit home when you look at individual states. The research actually breaks it down state by state, and there are some pretty big differences.
Okay, so, what were some of the biggest changes you noticed? Which states stood out?
6 states really jumped out, all seeing significant increases in their unauthorized immigrant populations just between 2019 and 2022. We're talking Florida, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Texas.
Wow.
Florida's increase was particularly noticeable, and it makes you think, right, what is it about certain states that attracts people?
Yeah.
Jobs, existing immigrant communities, social policies maybe? It's got to be a whole mix of things.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned Florida because I noticed California actually saw a decrease,
Right.
which, you always think of California and immigration going hand in hand. Kind of throws a wrench in things, doesn't it?
It really shows that these trends aren't the same everywhere, Migration patterns are constantly changing, influenced by all sorts of things. It's not a static picture, that's for sure.
Definitely. So we've got all these people coming to the U.S. from different countries, settling in different states. What kind of impact are they having on the workforce? That's got to be a big factor, right?
Yeah, huge. And the research digs into this too. It's really interesting. Between 2019 and 2022, the number of unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. workforce actually went up to 8.3 million. That's about the same as 2008 and 2011, which were considered like peak years for unauthorized immigration.
So even though the countries people are coming from have changed and the overall number of unauthorized immigrants is fluctuating, they're still a big part of the workforce.
Exactly. That 8.3 million is a pretty significant chunk of the total U.S. workforce. And when you start to see it broken down by state, it really highlights the differences from one place to the next.
Okay, what are we talking about here? Which states are we looking at?
Okay, so at the top of the list, you've got Nevada, with a full 9% of its workforce being unauthorized immigrants.
Wow, 9%.
Right. Then Texas and Florida close behind at 8%, and New Jersey and California both at 7%.
Those are big numbers. Makes you think about the ripple effect on those states' economies. Are they filling labor shortages, contributing to certain industries? There are so many layers to this.
There really are. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have states where unauthorized immigration barely registers in the workforce, like Maine, Montana, Vermont, West Virginia. Unauthorized immigrants make up less than 1% of the workforce there. Talk about a contrast.
That really highlights how much variation there is from state to state. It's not just national trends, it's about how those trends affect different communities across the country.
Absolutely. And it's not just about jobs and the economy. We also need to consider the families and individuals directly impacted by this, One thing that really stood out to me in the research was this idea of mixed status households.
Mixed status households, what is that?
So basically, it's families where you have unauthorized immigrants living with family members who are U.S. born or lawful immigrants. It's way more common than you might think.
Huh, interesting. That adds another layer of complexity for sure. What are some of the challenges these families might face?
You're talking about legal hurdles, social stigma, the constant fear of being separated. These families are navigating a system that often feels stacked against them, and the numbers are pretty big. In 2022, an estimated 4.4 million U.S.-born children were living with at least one unauthorized immigrant parent.
Wow, 4.4 million. That's not just a number. It's millions of kids, millions of families whose lives are directly impacted by these policies and how people view unauthorized immigration.
Exactly. It shows the human cost of this issue. We're not just talking statistics. We're talking about real lives, real families just trying to build a future. And a lot of times they're stuck in this web of legal uncertainty, financial struggles, and social isolation.
It really adds a new dimension to the conversation, doesn't it? A good reminder that these aren't just headlines, these are real issues affecting real people.
Totally. And it highlights how important it is to approach immigration policy with empathy and understanding.
For sure. Now, about the changing demographics of unauthorized immigration. We talked about the decrease in Mexican nationals. What about other countries? Who are we seeing now?
Well, we were just talking about Mexico, and even though the numbers are dropping, they're still a major source.
Right.
But right behind them is Venezuela. And it's really a reflection of what's happening there, with all the political and economic instability. Back in 2007, there were only around 55,000 unauthorized immigrants from Venezuela living in the U.S.
Wow.
Jump ahead to 2022, and that number is, get this, 270,000.
That's a huge increase.
Yeah.
It really shows how desperate things must be for people to leave everything behind like that.
It does, doesn't it? They're risking everything for a chance at a better life. And it shows how global events can have such a huge impact on migration. It's not always a personal choice. Sometimes it's about forces beyond our control, pushing people to search for something better, even if it means taking huge risks.
So besides Mexico and Venezuela, who else is coming to the U.S.?
Well, we're also seeing big numbers from El Salvador, India, Guatemala, and Honduras, all facing their own unique struggles. economic instability, violence, persecution, you name it. It really makes you think about the reasons why someone would make the decision to leave everything they know and try to start over in a new country. It's often a last resort, driven by circumstances beyond their control.
Like a global mosaic, each piece representing a different story, a different reason for coming here. It makes you wonder, with so many people coming from different backgrounds now, has the makeup of unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. changed?
Oh, it definitely has. Policymakers and social services are trying to adapt to this new reality. I mean, the needs of a family fleeing political violence in Venezuela are going to be very different from a family coming from India seeking better economic opportunities.
Right.
Understanding these differences is key to finding solutions that are effective and humane as we deal with this new wave of immigration.
It's about seeing the people behind the numbers, recognizing that these are individuals, families, all with hopes and dreams, not just statistics.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We got to humanize this issue.
Well said. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We explored the changing landscape of unauthorized immigration, from why the numbers are rising again, to who's coming to the U.S. and how it's impacting communities. As we wrap things up, what are your final thoughts? What should we, as engaged citizens, be taking away from this conversation?
For me, the biggest takeaway is just how complicated this whole issue really is. There's no single story, no easy answers. We're talking about a perfect storm of global trends, economic disparities, political climates, and personal choices all coming together. It creates a constantly shifting landscape,
It's a good reminder that things aren't always black and white. There's always more to the story than the headlines. We got to be willing to look deeper.
Exactly. And as we move forward, we have to be empathetic.
Yeah.
We need to understand what's driving migration and commit to policies that are both effective and humane.
Policies that acknowledge the human beings at the heart of this issue. So as you encounter these conversations out there, in the news, in your communities, remember the stories we've discussed, the complexities. It's just the beginning. Keep asking questions. Keep learning. Because open, honest dialogue is the only way we can create a better, fairer world for everyone.